calling from a 479 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Long-time listener, occasional IMer, BRB forever.
BRB forever. Go ahead.
I wanted to talk about how we talk about Palestine.
Yep.
Sorry, I'm very nervous.
You're doing great.
So I wanted to talk about, not so much specifically about genocide, but about how we talk about Palestine in general and Israel in general. And particularly the language we use. So when you use the words siege and blockade and occupation, even the word apartheid, I think that those are not very emotionally or morally hard-hitting words. They don't have valence to them. And I think that we should talk about that more in terms of specifically crime and criminality, criminals and victims, and talk more about the scope of the crime. I think that's really important and something that I don't hear people talking about.
So what word would you use as opposed to apartheid, siege, blockade?
So I'm not talking about specifically just replacing those words. Well, I guess I am. I'm specifically talking about using the word crime. And I think maybe the reason that people don't use it is because until very recently, the things that were happening weren't technically crimes. And maybe that's why. But so like when the Biden administration, I always think specifically about when Kamala Harris has brought up, when she has spoken, those memorized lines about Palestinians, she brings up, the sovereignty and the self-determination that Palestinians so rightly deserve, or something like that, she would always say. And I think that what we don't get, a question that doesn't get asked is, who stole their sovereignty from them? Who stole that self-determination from them? These are crimes that were committed against the Palestinian people. The Palestinian people are victims of these crimes. And that doesn't come across, I think, when you use words like siege and blockade and occupation and apartheid. To most people, those don't really mean much of anything.
I would posit that a lot of the way that if those words don't really mean much to people, they're trying to find an excuse for it not to mean something. So I hear what you're saying, and it's also, I think what you're trying to incorporate is the broader historical context, right? But there's so many different layers of obfuscation that we're dealing with right now. Like, the number one thing is that it's called a war in Gaza. We know it's not.
That's
a war,
it. It's like
right?
They say things are war crimes, but that puts in the context of a war.
Right. Even when you say it, that's a great point, Matt. So if you were to say Netanyahu is a war criminal, which now he has a warrant out for his arrest, perhaps he could be it still is in the context of this is a war, but we know it's not, right? We know that that's not the case.
Colonial massacre, technically.
Yeah. There's reporting that maybe the reason that the Lebanon ceasefire is a little closer is because, Hezbollah's hitting some targets, and they actually have the ability to kind of fight back more than the open air prison where Gaza is. So, I hear what you're saying. I just think that if we're at a point not a year and 2 months into this and people are still not able to have moral clarity on this, it's because they're looking for an excuse.
I think there's a reason why they push back so hard on that word genocide is because they're afraid of it sticking in some fashion. But what is apartheid? How old are you, BRB, if I can ask?
I'm in my 40s.
Apartheid to me, and maybe that's because I'm older, is a pretty bad thing. Apartheid became a very sort of knee-jerk thing. In fact, I think Haaretz just got basically boycotted by the Israeli government because of using the term apartheid. So I'm not sure that crime, saying.
Let me say specifically with apartheid. That's a word that's been used to describe Israel for decades now, and it's still something that people, I think, so like specifically with Ta-Nehisi Coates, when he went, he said he didn't really get it until he was there. And that's something that a lot of people say before they go to the West Bank. They didn't get it until they're there, even though it's been described as apartheid for decades.
Well, but I think
that's what I mean when I say that word specifically does not have emotional valence.
I mean, I don't know that. I haven't read Coates's book, but I don't know that he had heard it as apartheid. I mean, the issue you're talking about is not that the word didn't have the valiance, is that he didn't believe it. And if I say there's a crime being committed there and they're victims, well, it's one thing to hear it, but if you don't believe it, you don't believe it. I think that's the point. Is I don't think this is. I don't think there's a language. Frankly, I think showing videos, and I think that's the issue.
Well, I want to talk specifically about the scope of the crimes. So, like every settlement in the West Bank is a crime. The apartheid wall is a crime. Every soldier who is present that's a crime. Every drone flying overhead, every surveillance camera, those are crimes. The wall around the Gaza Strip is a crime, and it's a crime perpetrated every second of every day, for years, for decades, for entire lifetimes. And for generations, against millions and millions and millions of people. So the scope of the crimes, the scope of the criminality, the scope of the victimhood is what I'm trying to convey.
I think that's noble, and I understand what you're saying. I just don't think language is the problem. I think we have an issue in this country where we have basically dehumanized people in the Middle East and Arab people in a multi-decade-long project that has allowed people to think about Israel in this way, and we have a whole media apparatus that upholds it. And what Coates does is he describes it in terms of Jim Crow, which is a little bit more digestible, I think, for some liberals in this country. And I like that route because it makes it hits at a pang for liberal Zionists of like, oh, this is familiar to me, right? Yep. And when Sam talks about apartheid, I do think that like for generations that protested that also hits on that. So I gotta say I don't fully agree, but I think that you're trying. I understand why you want to communicate in a different way because it's so frustrating that people don't seem to care. But it
seems that the crime is an easier entry point for people to get access to what it is. When you just say this is a crime, this is a crime, this is a crime, and then these crimes are perpetrated against millions and millions and millions of people.
Okay. I think like I honestly don't think this is a problem of language. Having engaged a lot of these people, I mean, because I've certainly used the word crime. I mean, it's criminal, of course it is. Under international law. But look at the ICC. Like literally a criminal warrant has been issued, and the pushback is they are completely illegitimate to make that assessment. I mean, I think, but let 1,000 flowers bloom. But I appreciate the call. Well, I'll think about it. I appreciate it. I just appreciate it.
Thanks.
Matthew Selt, if language isn't the solution, that leaves the majority report, with no weapons in which to fight. No, I don't think that's the case. I don't think I'm not saying we shouldn't talk about it or that we shouldn't use words, but I just disagree that the word crime has more resonance with people than maybe the word apartheid necessarily. Or, maybe the crime of apartheid or the crime of occupation.
Also, this show isn't the weapon. Like, people getting organized and doing things in the real world is the weapon. We're mainly trying to blunt the weapons of people who would attack the actual people doing the fighting.
Yeah. I mean, and also it's a separate example, but the criminal narrative didn't really help in this election.
And Chris Burdick makes the point, genocide and apartheid are powerful terms in a way that crime just isn't. Yeah. If anything, reducing Israel's actions to crimes diminish them to the point when they share a category with shoplifting. I mean, I think there's an argument to that, right? Like, this isn't like a crime implies sort of something that's like temporal and like you commit a crime, but there's an ongoing dynamic. I don't know. I
think the word crime is all over it. War crimes, crimes of humanity, crime of occupation. People, it's crime. Yeah, international crimes. Who's the cops?
That's the other problem. Like, the solution to this is not going to be cops. The solution to it is going to be undermining the support for these ongoing, like, sort of dynamics in this country. And I guess, you know, the people who believe that a crime is being committed or that apartheid's being committed or genocide's being committed, they can't go over there and arrest these people. But what they can do is chip away at the support for these activities. I mean, I think ultimately, you know, what happened with apartheid South Africa is a rough approximation of what's going to have to happen. It's much more difficult in many respects. Born Kokesh, isn't genocide referred to as the crime of crimes? Hey folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.